Okay, I think we may begin. So I'd like to welcome everybody at the fifth webinar of Philosophical Education Journal. Our journal is a biannual journal that is published at the Faculty of Philosophy at the University of Warsaw. And in this cycle of webinars, we will be having in total 6 webinars about the upcoming issues. This is the fifth webinar that we have organized with the purpose to promote the articles that have been submitted, have been accepted, or are close to being accepted for publication. And as I've said a moment ago, the webinar is not just for those who participate. As you see, there are not many of us, but also the recording is being made so that the recording may be published on YouTube, and then the articles will be presented in this way, let's say permanently. So my name is Filip Łapiński. I am the managing editor of Philosophical Education Journal. I would like to welcome everybody also in the name of Marcin Trepczyński, Dr. Trepczyński, who is the chief editor of our journal, but at the exact hour that we are starting our webinar, he is launching a conference in Warsaw. So he was just able to connect with us like 10 minutes ago for a moment and then disconnect. But I still hope that we will be able to have a meaningful conversation on your articles and on the issue. And the issue that we are almost all of us are preparing is the issue on AI ethics, but I will not present the issue longer since this will be done by our issue editor, one of our issue editors, Sara Lumbreras Sancho. So let me introduce Sara and invite her to tell us a few words about the idea of the issue, how it came into being, and what is the plan of the issue editors for the issues. Sara, thank you very much, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Philip. I would like to first highlight that the idea of the issue is to be able to share the recent advancements in the field of the ethics of AI, which is, as you all know, a very vibrant field and where reflection is truly necessary. And even more when we can see emerging applications of AI, such as generative AI, or the consequences of its application with regards to human dignity or even in the labor market. So what we did was to create this, to create this issue or to start this issue with three main research lines where we would focus the contributions. The first one was practical and applied ethics, where the articles would be focused on the really specific ethical challenges, such as, for instance, bias and discrimination and all that results from the requirements of transparency. Also, the very sensitive applications of AI, or what has been recently dubbed the high stakes applications of AI, such as what happens in the medical field, in the healthcare field, in anything that has to do with justice, and as I was saying before, very importantly, the impact on labor markets. Also, this includes everything that has to do with accountability and security as well. So that was the first the set of topics that we had in mind. And also for the second field, the second topics, we wanted to focus on the long-term challenges, which are sometimes forgotten when we deal with the ethics of AI. So as I said, the first part was dealing with the very specific short-term challenges, the second part with the long-term ones, such as the alignment problem. So how do we make sure that AI does what we want it to do, which is known, as I said, as the alignment problem, and everything that has to do with the prevention of existential risks. And also, we didn't want to stay in the negative, but we added there very clearly that we also wanted to look at the long-term positive potentials. And we also welcome articles that deal with predicting these future positive developments in everything that is related to AI. And then last, our third set of topics for the special issue was on the moral status of AI and ethics and beyond meta ethics, as we said in the call for papers. So more profound questions on whether the AI can be an agent and in what sense, or what do we mean by saying that human beings have a relationship with AI. That is all in this third set of topics, which couldn't be more relevant, even if at the beginning some of the topics, such as human AI interactions, sounded a little bit far away. Now we have seen already, I think that it has been like 3 suicides stemming from interactions with chatbots, and 80% of Gen Z says that they would be okay having a relationship with an AI rather than a human person, and something around 70% of ChatGPT users confirm that they have used GPT also to ask for personal advice. So this third part of the special issue is equally important as the other two. So as I was saying, the main idea is we wanted to gather contributions on those emerging fields, very specific topics, very specific applications, also on the long-term challenges and also positive impacts. And third, what goes a little bit beyond, can the machine be an agent, and how can humans relate to it?
Thank you very much.
And if I may say, it will be a pleasure to see the presentations for these articles, which are so different and cover these areas where reflection is so necessary.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I may just add to the presentation of Sara that, well, we have gathered submissions from, I would say, literally all over the world on one hand. So we are happy that the topic meets interest from scholars all over the world. On the other hand, it turned out to be a demanding issue because of the differing quality of the submissions. I am happy to say that the submissions that are presented today are of high quality, but unfortunately not all of the submissions that we have received were of similar quality, and therefore we have been forced to reject some of those, and that resulted in the prolonging of the whole publication process. Because we just after the first, let's say, first round of dealing with submissions, we ended up with less articles that are accepted for publishing or almost ready to be accepted for publishing, less number than we wanted to be in the issue, and therefore we have conducted, let's say, a second round of gathering submissions, and we are in the process of examining those, getting them under peer review, and therefore we will also be having, I want us to have a 6th webinar on the same issue in the future. But for now, let us focus on the 2 submissions that have successfully finished peer review or are basically at the end of the process. And these are the articles of Luka Perušić and Aleksandra Vučković in our plan. Luka Perušić was supposed to present as the first author, and the article bears the title Ideological Limits to Ethical Artificial Intelligence. Of course, I will not elaborate on the content of the article any further. Luka, please, the floor is yours. Tell us a little more about the article of yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for organizing the topic. I liked the project and I wanted to try to contribute in some way. I'm happy that the contribution was satisfying. And also, I would like to publicly say that I really love this idea of webinar type presentation of papers. And I've been thinking for this for a while, and I'm actually thinking about including this into my own journals in the future. So a great practice. I prepared a paper, brief presentation through the paper because of the high level of terminology that's being used. I wouldn't really want to babble about it. So I will try to read it, but I'll read it, but I'll try to read it in a way maybe that will be less less robotic and more maybe humane. So in this sense, I figured as I've been reading about AI systems, and given that I was in game development for quite some time, I also had some experience with how AI is developed. And I felt that research on ideological aspect of AI systems is basically underrepresented. And the subject may appear in discussions on the quality and content of data used to train the AI system, because the data can be affected by various types of biases. But other than that, not much is discussed on how AI mediates ideological structure of human reality, and is it actually representative of some particular ideology. And in my opinion, the extreme amount of papers on AI focuses on pragmatic aspects of social organization and ethical behavior, but I find this to be incomplete because it is ignoring the nature of the general social framework, and this social framework is what defines the current persistence, development, and the implementation of AI systems. I mean, even in the most important textbooks on AI, for example, there is a predominant preference of utilitarianism over, for example, virtue ethics and deontology, but this is not recognized as a problem of ideological framework. It is simply thought of as being the best solution to go with. So what I wanted to do was to demonstrate that any discussion on whatever an ethical AI system would be doesn't make much sense unless we first discuss the possible ideological background of AI as an idea, an artifact, and as a deployed unit populating our current social, political, and economic structure. So the first thing I did in the paper was to analyze what ethical means in the phrase ethical AI. And there were two reasons why I wanted to do that. First, currently what is predominantly meant by the word ethical in discussions on AI has nothing to do with morality or character, but with a code of conduct. And this I felt is already a major problem, because a code of conduct can be and often is subject to ideology and interest. It is often adapted to a particular pragmatic situation rather than whatever a true moral conduct would actually be. And because it is thought of as being a matter of conduct, it has been positioned against the legal system. If a particular order is part of the legal system, we would have to follow it. And if it is not part of, and if it is a part of ethical system, we can and will disregard it. This is the typical situation in modern corporate industries and the big tech. Their mouth is basically full of ethics, but in practice, they are the first to ignore ethics wherever they can and bend the laws to the best of their abilities. And OpenAI is maybe the prime example of this practice. But this is also the reality of broader political establishment. Ethics plays a role in misguiding the population, while in practice, whatever is considered ethical is in fact ethical insofar as it contributes to the ideological framework embodied in any political system and its leaders. Ethical AI is AI system whose construction and performance is subject to predefined norms and values that are considered socially acceptable. However, what is socially acceptable in its universality is challenged by the realism of cultural relativism and personal preference. Ethical AI is as a term hides a structural complexity essentially related to the ideological component by which the social acceptability inherent to the term is limited. So what I aimed to show was that ethically aligned AI, although discussed as if it is a matter of universal moral code, in practice embodies systematized ideas for a preferred non-universal outcome that is presented as ethically aligned product. The ideological limits emanate from the core system of ideas embodied in the product or its application, in that any ethical alignment, either as engineered or applied, becomes a set of non-universal preferences that benefit some but not all. In that sense, ethical becomes a simple descriptive term for having a set of dispositional principles for expected conduct, and not a term referring to what is truly right or wrong, good or evil, morally permissible or impermissible, that we may further find to be universal or universalizable. So to demonstrate the problem, I applied the theory of artifacts. And firstly, AI is essentially an imitative solution that becomes implemented into machine systems performing actions that use the distinct computational method. So it is a process that exploits as Seaton stated, a realization that nature or human nature works a certain way. So constructed as a material system that combine multiple natural effects into a chain of effects to our expected working advantage. So because AI was invented, designed, developed, and deployed by human beings, it should be understood as a product, a non-living product of human being. Being a software in a hardware shell, as product, AI systems have all the characteristics of constructed artifacts. Objects made by human being that is not naturally present, but occurs as a result of the preparative or investigative procedure by human beings, as stated by Ekmeci and Arda. For such an object to be, matter is then transformed such that the resulting physical construction has certain capacities or shows a particular kind of behavior, as stated by Croix, attaining the status of objects that have a specific practical forness, to which it is brought by human activity. And the element of forness explicates the fundamental aspect of artifacts as human-made conveyance. Being for something means that there is an interactor that will activate properties of conveyance in a specific artifact and cause an effect manifesting within the artifact and to its environment. And for that reasons, scholars in the second half of 20th century slowly began to understand human products, technical artifacts foremostly as mediators. And this mediation of value that AI exerts grants them the, I quote, normative power that are examples of how code is law, as well as how code creates law, or rather produces norms, as stated by De Gregorio. It can create new rules of interaction between economic agents to create a new form of social order, as stated by Melkevik. Like any other technological invention, AI development does not take place in a vacuum. The development and adoption of technology is always highly social and cultural, embedded within a rich network of human and non-human actors, as stated by Mann. And so this forness is what can be monitored to reveal cultural forces that push technological solutions into motion. And I find maybe the best example, because it is perfected to the last detail. The Artificial Intelligence Act of the European Union can be seen as a paradigmatic example of the systematized proscription of ideas anchored into a single phenomenon around which it wants to confirm its culture. So the adopted text clearly states that, I quote, development and use of ethically embedded artificial intelligence will have to respect union values and the charter. It is here where the basic ideological limits begin to show contours, because what is ethical is what are union values. This kind of formulation demonstrates the approach to ethics as being a preferred set of norms, altogether rendered as what is ethical, but actually means what can be arbitrarily stated. It defeats the idea of universal ethos practically, and regardless of how much European Union may claim that its values have a universal reach, and it transforms the original concept of ethical as universal for every human being into a technical term. National strategies all across the world, I've read and studied most of them, demonstrate that ethical is just a set of preferences under ideological framework for the benefit of a particular social set. And in the service of this ideological system, any ethical AI, truly ethical AI, is further diminished by the global military competitivity, in which it is already assumed that AI will give those who are well prepared an upper hand, I quote, because the data will enable one to know one's enemy as well as one knows oneself and gain the competitive advantage as stated by Fricke. And as Elke Schwartz observes, the underlying question, for example, shifts from whether it is ethical to kill to whether machines would do the killing better than humans. The ethical task at hand is to kill better and more humanely. So due to the limited impact of arbitrary ethical standards, moreover, those systems that insist on thorough and strict adherence to complex rules, such as European Union, may also lose out in the race to win through the rules they establish, raising the question of the moral defensibility of rigorously ethically setting up AI systems. From the perspective of the population shaped by the Fourth Industrial Revolution, in the logic of racing for the survival, the ethical AI might actually appear unethical. And of the large problems related to the ideological elements of ethical AI, last but not least is the demographic structure and lifestyle encompassing the development and discussion on AI, dominated by workaholic white male population with some common characteristics related to the underlying cultural and possibly biological traits. The tech culture toxicity goes beyond science and business solutions, as AI systems are heavily present in video gaming industry, for example, in which the past 10 years were abundant with sexual, racial, and exploitation scandals, as well as labor abuse, usually in the working environment of leading giants such as Activision Blizzard, CD Projekt Red, and Electronic Arts, to name just a few. It is a, I quote, culture known for hyper-masculine coder of bro game or bro gamer, with over 60% of women reporting unwanted sexual advances and dealing with class action lawsuit that has accused a widely celebrated tech company of fostering racial conditions for years, including daily subjection to racial slurs, being assigned menial jobs in segregated area of factory, and being passed over in promotions for management, as stated by Mann. And I think that it is not a coincidence that some of the best work that has been done on ideology of artificial intelligence, for example, the book, the study, the Atlas of AI, was done by a female person, by Kate Crawford. And where male normative values more clearly manifest is in the category of ethical design and ethical development of AI by their approach to understanding AI and solving problems, as classical empirical studies show that women do not, as men typically do, address moral problems primarily through a calculating, rational, logic-oriented ethics of some kind of justice, but rather interpret them within a wider framework of an empathic, emotion-oriented ethics of care, as stated by Hagendorf, and they still have this kind of orientational value. And we do not have to think about it in the classical terms of how, for example, Simmel divided the understanding of culture between a typical emotional female person and typical non-emotional rational male person. The fact that these two approaches diverge in such a way is also related to what has been happening basically since Neolithic times. There may be ways to perfect AI systems so that they support humanity in its evolution of the humane and resemble a universal code of conduct, but the deployment of AI systems is the dimension where their utility is actually encumbered by the broader ideological framework that arises from the cultural conflicts and habits that have historically been in place. For example, it is often argued that AI systems should be invested in and implemented in medical system, but and that may have great benefit, but what use of the general system is if what AI can achieve is behind a paywall that many cannot or will not be able to afford. The fact is, the exploration, discussion, and development of universal ethical AI is what would inevitably hinder the development and progress of AI system, as it would help to impede the particularist and current exceptionalist political and economic agenda, which is certainly one of the reasons why the issue is systematically avoided. But the problems I have highlighted and discussed in this paper, undoubtedly not the only ones, continue with everything that will happen with AI systems in the coming future. And I think that it will spill over into the field of brain-computer interface products, which are currently being reviewed by plentiful of supranational entities. In terms of how AI could really contribute to humanity, the concept of, and I mean, not the concept, the fact of business and politics as usual is ideologically the worst realization of its potential. And here I will bring this brief presentation of paper to conclusion, which is in alignment with the paper. In my opinion, the main issue of justifying the fundamental idea that the use of structurally saturated AI systems is imperative for, I quote, better future of humanity is quickly actually being buried by the positivist and pragmatic approach to AI, and that too is in a sense ideological in nature. In my opinion, thus, I think that these issues are not to be taken, are not being talked about enough, and they are not being researched enough. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have a question to the author?
I have one question. Thank you for this thought-provoking presentation. What I was wondering, have you considered whether policies such as EU Act that you have mentioned perhaps unintentionally favor big companies that develop AI as opposed to smaller companies that also develop their AI solutions? Because what it seems to me is that if you're a large company and you want to sell your product in European Union, but its ethics does not align with the ideology of EU, then you can simply pay the penalties and proceed. But if you're a smaller developer, you have to take extra caution to avoid breaking some of those boundaries, ethical boundaries, so it may be more difficult for you to sell your product in EU. Do you think there is some unintentional favorism towards larger companies?
Thank you for the question. It's a great question. I will try to answer. I think that first of all, I think that European Union's Act on Artificial Intelligence is really a brilliant legal document. I think it's maybe it's definitely a standard that should be followed. But the fact is that it's heavily oriented towards economic effectiveness. So everything that has been done quite well, but still there is this bracket throughout the paper, which basically means that whenever we think that whatever we have stated in this document could hinder the development, then those who are developing have the advantage over all other facts, over all other statements, legal orders, or whatever. So in that sense, there is a tendency towards economic advantage that may actually hinder everything that's related to human rights. And in that sense, although in my opinion, Act and as European Union usually does, it has a lot of mechanisms which are connected to other incentives of other projects trying to create some kind of healthy, competitive network of different software developers working under EU. It still doesn't actually brings advantage to smaller companies, and it doesn't because simply it cannot operate with the amount of money that has been accumulated by the big tech in the past 100 years. And we can give a simple example of Microsoft donating over $13 billion to OpenAI. So even if they create an incredible amount of different incentives towards developing an AI system, the amount of cash flow that goes into the big developers, or maybe the amount of cash flow that goes into smaller companies that became integrated with big developers, eventually overcomes, in my opinion, currently eventually overcomes this system, and then the the bracket or the incentive of allowing economic or allowing the technological development despite all the limitations that should control the market and our communication with technology and different nations becomes falls into a second place. So I would say that I would say that an act and the combination of programs with this act do a great job in stimulating smaller teams, which means that it allows the possibility to develop more sensible AI systems. But on the long run, it has issues with this immense foreign powerful big techs that have exploited the faults of legal system and social system in the past 100 years, and they still do not have, in my opinion, mechanisms to cope with that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Is there time for another question?
Of course, yes.
You mentioned brain-computer interfaces as a different area where we're gonna have some reflection needs that are very similar. Could you please give us like the main highlights that you think we should look at when we think about the ethics of brain-computer interfaces?
Thank you for the question. If on the long run the community that is surrounding the AI would be interested in trying to be kind of at the forefront of analyzing brain-computer interface, I'd be very interested in conjoining forces. I just applied for several fundings related to brain-computer interface issues. Because I think that this is the next big thing. European Union published a report like literally like a year ago or a few months ago, maybe the time is passing fast, so I forgot, but very recently, they published a report highlighting actually that they think that we are entering into what they name the age of brain-computer interface. So this means that AI as a supranational organization identified some first issues with it, but actually identified economic advantages of brain-computer interface, and this means that they will soon begin to stimulate the development and begin to develop legal framework for that. And the Council of Europe has a few years ago already published a declaration stating that the brain-computer interface will probably most likely soon enter the economic competitive framework, and that we should really be careful about what they are developing. The main problems, in my opinion, currently most of what is being projected into the question is still to some degree science fiction. Still, I'd say to some degree science fiction, the real issues that can come with a brain-computer interface. But AI systems are a good example of how it has been thought of. Yeah, how it has been thought of as being sci-fi for too long. So, in my opinion, currently the main problem is related to what actually physically or neurologically brain-computer interfaces do to human beings. What data is being sent to them, what data is being extracted from them. But on the long run, this means a multitude of issues. This means the problem of the integrity of neurological coherency of human beings. It means the possibility of extracting everything that is being thought of within our brains. And it literally means the possibility of extracting whatever is being created under in our neurological system. And already some of the many startup companies have managed to send data into the brain and extract this data out of the brain and have a recording of this process of thinking, which is still in a very early, very pre-alpha phases, but shows what can happen in 10, 15, 20 years with a particular investments of money. And already they are talking about integrating brain-computer interface systems with AI systems. So this means, on the long run, this means a possibility of creating enhanced human entities again. It means possibility of controlling brain processes or thought processes. It means possibility of a different type of policing of human entities and so on. And in my opinion, I think that the ethical forefront sorry, it's a wrong word. I think that the ethical community, the community dealing with ethical issues, the professionals dealing with ethical and legal issues, has to some degree managed to reach a technological advancement. So we've been like fighting with it and running behind it for at least 100 years. I think that now we are in position to actually be able to develop predictive rules for how to approach new technological convergences, and that now we have actually a real possibility to develop ethical and legal framework before the most problematic technological advances kick in. If I manage to answer your question.
Yeah, that was very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm happy that we have a lively discussion of the Luka's article, but now we'll get to another presentation of Aleksandra Vučković on the article In Defense of LLM-Based Tools in Scientific Writing, Epistemic and Ethical Considerations of LLM-Restrictive Publishing Policies. So I would say a non-conformist, non-orthodox voice in the matter. And without further ado, Aleksandra, please continue.
Thank you. Would it be okay if I shared my presentation? So I don't know if I'm allowed to screen share. Oh, okay, I am allowed.
Great, thank you.
You should see it now, and I'll start slideshow so you can see it better. So yes, thank you for having me. And as you said, in this article, I will try to defend what many will consider probably undefendable, and that is in which certain circumstances it is okay for authors to use large language models and chatbots to help them in scientific writing, and I will approach this issue from both epistemic and ethical perspective and hopefully offer some insights on why we should be more tolerant towards LLM-based tools in scientific publishing. So, as you can see, this is the brief overview of my presentation. And the first thing we'll see how did this fear of authors abusing LLMs led to transformation in publishing policies. But before we say whether those policies are justified and whether they can fairly be implemented and enforced, it is also important to look at the issue from the epistemic perspective and see whether we can even establish when a text or a scientific paper has been AI generated. Because if we can, then maybe we can also enforce those rules. And if we cannot, then I'm not sure we can fairly introduce those rules that prohibit LLM-based tools if we cannot establish accurately whether text was AI generated or written by human. Then we'll proceed to ethical challenge, which is whether these restrictions favor native English speakers. And finally, we'll proceed to see what counts as fair use of LLMs in scientific writing, because if I'm going to convince you that we should be more tolerant towards chatbots and other LLM tools in scientific writing, then it's also important to highlight some limitations to us being allowed to use them, because not every use is fair. And hopefully we will have some outlook for future policies on LLMs. So the first thing is, of course, as soon as chatbots have become widely available, scientific publishers have changed their policies. So many of them strictly now prohibit any use of LLMs, and others limit them to only language perfection. So they had to react very quickly because the development of chatbots was also very rapid. And here I tried to include some of the reasons why such restrictive policies have arisen. And first of all, we have fears of plagiarism, which is also the reason why many universities worldwide have prohibited their students from using ChatGPT or similar tools, because they were fearing that the students would not be writing their own papers and allowing chatbots to do their job for them. There's also insufficient accuracy of LLM output, because what may be useful for general purposes does not necessarily have to be sufficiently accurate for scientific purposes, especially as LLMs are prone to hallucinations, that is the imaginary data, which can either be problematic in the sense of faithfulness, which means that the output does not align with the context of the input. You ask one question, but it actually answers something else, or it can simply be wrong in the terms of actualness, that LLM output may simply have wrong answers for you. And it is especially dangerous if the output is combined of both true and false data, because it makes it sound convincing, but on the other hand also includes inaccuracies, and inaccuracies are presented in a very misleading way, so that's also dangerous. Another concern is that many LLMs simply do not provide sources for their claims. So even if it's true, you cannot simply check it that easily, because they don't say what their source is, there are no references, so that's also dangerous. And finally, authors, when they have such powerful tools, may become too careless and allow chatbots to write significant portions of the paper, which is not good. But of course, it's easy to say that there should be some policies, but can we enforce them? That's an entirely different question. So if we want to enforce them, and if we want to prohibit AI-generated papers, then we should be able to recognize AI-generated papers. And there are challenges from epistemic point of view, because currently available research has shown mixed results. So as you can see, some research states that experts usually can differentiate AI-generated text from human written, but also when we move from highly trained experts to regular school teachers, we can see that they have difficulties in differentiating between essays that were written by students and those written by ChatGPT, which is concerning. And there are some also explanations on how we are inherently biased towards some type of writing to see it as human written. So if, for instance, it includes a lot of personal anecdotes, or if it's written in the first person, then we'll be more inclined to think of that article as human written, as opposed if it's very robotic, if it's very kind of not fluent enough, then we'll be inclined to think of that paper as AI generated. It's just how we perceive the differences between how computers write and between how other people write. So, okay, we may be imperfect in judging whether text was AI generated or human written, but there is an alternative, and that is to allow AI to recognize whether the text was AI generated. But also we encounter problems here as well. And as you can see, one study says that out of 16 different tools for the detection of AI-generated text, 13 have made mistakes. Another study has shown that initially, tools for detection of AI-generated text had impressive scores, you can see here. But also, when you change the parameters and when you introduce some additional steps, suddenly those recognitions were not as accurate. So what led to false positives, that is what led to human written text wrongly being recognized as AI generated, was when translation tools were used, and it showed a significant drop of accuracy. On the other hand, false negatives occurred if they used another AI-generated step. That is, if they paraphrase the AI-generated text with another AI tool, then suddenly for AI detection tools dropped in accuracy of rightfully recognizing those texts as AI-generated. More recent studies have shown more promising results in terms that one of the AI detectors, Turnitin, maintained 100% accuracy even after additional AI paraphrasing. But it's just one tool, not all the available tools for AI detection. And it also did only test AI-generated texts in terms whether these tools will catch them. They did not test these tools on human written text to see whether they will create false positives. So they didn't, Turnitin did not generate false negatives, but this study is limited in the sense that it did not include human written articles, so we don't know what would have happened and whether false positives would have occurred. Still, it is more promising than what we had before, but I think we are far from claiming we can sufficiently and precisely enough differentiate between AI-generated and human written text. And there is an additional problem when entrusting this differentiation process to another AI tools, because tools for detection of AI-generated text have the same problem as LLMs themselves, and that is the lack of transparency. They are both black box in the sense that we do not know what parameters are included in creation of the output. We only have our input, and then the magic happens, and we have the output. But we do not know what parameters both LLMs and the tools for LLM detection used to provide that specific output, and how accurate that the data these tools relied on is. So this brings us to main epistemic concerns. First, what I've been wondering is what counts as AI-generated text, because it's not the same if you do your research independently, you truly collect and check all your data, and then use LLM to help you formulate it and write it in a better linguistic manner. And if you use LLMs to provide the data for you, and then you write really that paper yourself, because in first case you're using LLMs only to improve your language, but in second case you're using LLM to do your research for you, and that is more dangerous. Another issue is, as I said, okay, we cannot trust LLMs because they're a black box, but the same issue applies to AI tools that detect LLM-generated texts. They both lack transparency, so why should we trust either one of those tools? I don't know. I think it's very dangerous. And finally, of course, if we all use LLMs and other AI tools, then we may lose diversity in our writing, both cultural and both in terms of style, and papers will over time may start to look more like each other, and this is not good because this lack of diversity is not only an ethical issue, but also an epistemic. If everything looks the same, then there is no progress in this field. So it's dangerous if you all write in the same way. So yeah, there's many epistemic concerns, but there are also ethical challenges I wanted to address here, and that is mainly, is it okay if we wrongly accuse someone of using LLM in writing paper when they have not? What happens? How do we treat those false positives, and how those false positives may impact researchers' careers if you're wrongly accused of using LLMs? And the main concern here, what I wanted to explore is here, whether those restrictions favor native English speakers. So what is going on, and what I explored in one of my previous research, was that non-native English speakers in general, even if we do not include AI, are more vulnerable to becoming victims of linguistic epistemic injustice, in terms that if they're not fluent in English enough, their research may not be taken as seriously as research of some other of their peers or some other researchers who are native English speakers. And this problem became even more prominent with AI-based tools and the tools for detection of LLM-generated text, because many studies have reported, you can see one example here, but there are many more, have reported that when international non-native English-speaking researchers or students write in English, their papers are more likely to be declared as false positives, to be wrongly accused of using LLM tools, than when native English speakers write in English. And there are many reasons why that may occur. First of all, the non-native English speakers may use AI tools that will check their grammar and their writing style, such as Grammarly. But when you use those tools, they will probably use more connectives or articles or the structures that are also found in AI-generated text. So you can use a legitimate tool for language assistance or for translation and make your manuscript sound like it was AI generated. So that is concerning. Also, tools that detect articles that are written by LLMs may also rely on how they follow certain patterns, how predictable they are. But the same thing can happen to non-native speakers, because their way of their writing style may also be more predictive than the writing style of those who are more fluent and more comfortable with the language. So again, there is higher risk that if you do not write very fluently, that you will be accused by AI tools that you have used another AI tool to write your paper. Another issue is that many tools for the detection of LLM-generated text are trained on high-quality scientific papers, which means that they are used to certain level of language proficiency and certain standards in writing papers. But if your paper is written in English that is less than perfect, then maybe it will raise some false alarms in terms of whether this paper is really written by human and whether it is AI generating. And finally, if we too much focus on prohibiting AI tools for writing scientific paper, we may miss out on the benefits that we can get from fair use of large language models, especially non-native English speakers. So when I mentioned that those benefits, I think it's okay to see what counts as fair use of large language models in scientific writing. So first of all, I think that the LLMs as we have them today are not suitable for problem solving because they still lack formal reasoning. So the problem parts of the paper, parts of the paper where you explore the issues that cannot be assigned to large language models because they simply predict our language, but they do not have logical reasoning in the way humans have. Additionally, we should be very cautious when using LLMs for all research languages. That is, those languages that are less spoken, that have less written materials in them, because they are not trained on sufficiently large amounts of data. So what works for English may not work for my native Serbian language, simply because there are not many written available results on the internet in languages spoken by smaller communities. But there are also some benefits, especially when it comes to LLMs that were specifically designed for research purposes, that can help us summarize articles, or that can help us or that can serve as more advanced literature research tools. So if you're looking for some papers on certain topics, these tools can help you find the papers that will be interesting to you more efficiently. This also is useful if we include LLM-based tools in libraries, because they can help you personalize your research and recommend more papers and books that can help you further your research. And finally, they can serve as a way of mitigating pre-existing linguistic epistemic injustice. As I said, even before AI, non-native speakers were disadvantaged because they had to put in more efforts in language perfection, and they were at risk of their research not being taken seriously because they're not as proficient as their native English-speaking peers. But if they use these LLM tools to correct their grammar, or as training programs to improve their own language proficiency, then they can be really helpful in addressing this linguistic gap between native and non-native speakers. So when it comes to future LLM policies, I think that we can that we should focus on the difference between communication and innovation goals. So innovation goals are the parts of your paper that are actually your ideas, that are your hypotheses that can be tested and checked by other peers. This is something that you should always do by yourself. We still need to collect our data manually without relying on LLMs. We should check them also manually, because LLM checking is not precise enough. And innovation goals should be responsibility of the authors. But when it comes to communication goals, that is how your paper is written, how you will present it, whether you used some AI tools to improve, to translate, to check on your grammar, I think this type of use should be allowed and should be encouraged. So if we consider this difference, I think we can draw the line on what counts as fair use of LLMs. So we shouldn't be too strict when prohibiting large language models in scientific writing, because there are many ways in which researchers, especially non-native English speakers, can benefit from them. And I think we should be more open and more trustful towards our peers, because that's the only way we can establish truly fair policies for the future. And when I say fair, I also mean it in terms of being inclusive enough for non-native speakers. And there is also an epistemic reason why we should be putting more trust in our peers than in tools for detection of LLM-generated text. And it is because our peers are not a black box in the same way that various AI tools are, because we have standards for testing and challenging someone's claim, and there is we can have more open discussion with our peers than we can peek into this black box of AI. So that was it, and thank you once again for inviting me. If you have any questions, I'll gladly answer them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So does anybody have any questions? Yes, Luka, please.
Yeah, thank you for the great presentation and the arguments provided. I fully agree with with your disposition and the arguments you gave. There's just one thing that I maybe I misunderstood it. So if you can clarify, because it's interesting to me and I didn't expect it. And this is I'll give an example. So when I'm reviewing, for example, my students' seminary papers, um, one of the ways in which I understand that they actually did their effort and that they actually written an original paper was based on uh, the imperfections in their style in use of the language and the little mistakes they make, and also to some degree the level of the ingenuity that can happen in an idea which is still far away from what AI can do. But you said that, but it seems like from based on what you said is that um, less fluency and lack of style of non-English speakers, non-English native speakers, actually contributed to the higher level of AI detection. So that the less they were good at the language meant that more possibility that they will be detected as using AI to write the paper. And this is strange to me because intuitively you would assume that if they are less fluent and make mistakes would account for an organicity or authenticity of their effort and not to them being machine written. So if you can maybe explain to me what's happening here. It appears like a paradox to me.
Yeah, it is, and yeah, I smiled because that's the same way I recognize my students' paper as well when I grade them. Yeah, I recognize their little mistakes, and I know, okay, you've done your work. But what I think is happening is when you're writing for a high impact scientific journal and you're aware that your language is not perfect, then you use additional tools such as Grammarly or may use some translation tools. And when you use those tools, they may make you sound more robotic. And someone who is more fluent would perhaps feel no need to use those tools, and their papers may just have that better flow. That is my personal opinion. And when it came to that Chinese study I cited, it was simply an empirical study, so they were not sure why when texts in English were written by Chinese students were more likely to be falsely labeled as AI generated, but their hypothesis was that they were using some linguistic structures that were unusual for English, but were very common in Chinese. So when literally translated to English, those linguistic structures that are common in Chinese, that made their papers sound awkward, and that is something that AI tools for detection have noticed as suspicious. But these are just two hypotheses. I'm not sure why it happens, but other research also pointed out, empirical research, that it happens. So I don't know. I cannot say that either of those answers are complete, or perhaps they're completely wrong, but these are just some of the hypotheses I encountered and my own hypothesis why it may happen. But thank you for the question. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for the answer. Hvala.
Well,
Thank you so much. Sara has left in the meantime. Are there any questions?
Well, unless I can make additional comment.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I find it very funny. And I think that this is maybe still one of the, powers of the argument for kind of artistic freedom or freedom of expression in philosophy and humanities, in a sense that we've been experiencing continuous efforts to maximally standardize scientific communication to the point of having only one particular style of communication of everything that is happening with the idea what we are writing in arguments, and it's been forced basically through mostly English American influence. And now we have the situation where the more standard you are in speaking and communicating, the less you are being identifiable as a human being, which I find quite funny.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. My previous paper was on how English-speaking community has set linguistic standards for scientific writing, but I think now with the AI, it truly opens many different perspectives, like the one you mentioned. Yeah, I completely agree.
Well, great. I'm happy that we had a few questions and discussion. Not always we had those during our webinars. And as I've said, the meeting has been recorded, so we will be able to see it again and send it to some of our friends or cooperators. I would like to thank all of you, especially Luka and Aleksandra, for preparing your presentations and initiating these discussions. I also invite for the 6th webinar on our upcoming issue. This will be another webinar on AI ethics. We will publish the information about the date and the program of the webinar. But so far, I would like to thank all of you and see you later.
Thank you very much. I will
Thank
do my
you.
best. I will do my best to join again.